Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and today we're talking about
justice, fairness, and anger. And I understand that you have a little story or a vignette here about what got you wanting to do a show episode specifically about this. So why don't you tell us what your thoughts were about that?
Yeah. I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and he had this idea that all anger stemmed from a sense of unfairness. And so this is started to get the gears rolling. So is all anger actually from unfairness? Is there justice? Is justice always fair? Or are there different ideas of justice? And then, but that's the question. Here's the rub: is that what one person thinks is fair or just may not be the same for another person, and justice is often summed up as giving each person what he or she deserves. But, same issue, same rub, what each person deserves may change due to the framework of justice one uses. So, is there any, essential justice out there that we can all go, point to as, oh, yes, that is definitely justice? Or is it all just subjective? Or can we make some, actual movement towards this goal?
I was kind of laughing because as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, there's some people that are never going to be satisfied no matter what you do. It's never enough for them. And it could be from, kind of narcissism, or they're just greedy or something like that. And typically those people, sometimes they'll say, yes, I'm doing the wrong thing, and I know that's the case, but I don't care. But a lot of times they have the view that their point of view is the right one, and everybody else are a bunch of suckers, or they give in too easily, And so, yeah, you're right. The what actually is just, we'll talk about this a bit. There are some people who think that there is some, standard out there, not necessarily in our world, but at least somewhere that we can access. But the trouble is, even if there is something like that, there's always going to be some people that you could almost turn their head towards it and they'd close their eyes, right? So right. I was laughing at that sort of image.
Yeah, it's one of the main things that we as humans have to try to live in these social structures that we create for each other, and we have to try to somehow live with each other. And we have to at least tell ourselves that we have some idea of justice. Kind of question is, how much of this is just a social construct, and how much of this can you convince other people to go along with?
You mean in the sense of maybe things aren't really just, but you manage to convince people or use rhetoric to persuade people that something is just, and then they'll honor that, they'll respect that, they'll stick with that. I think that is an idea that's been around for a very long time.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at is can we agree? Because if we at least agree, then we can move forward based on the agreement.
Well, at least so long as people are willing to honor the agreement, because I think we've all had the experience of thinking that a consensus has been attained, and then somebody comes back and it turns out that they see things very differently than we do, Or if you think about legal matters, oftentimes we have to go to court about, agreements or contracts or, I'm forgetting the name, terms of service, right, for internet things. Because even though it's down there in literal black and white, words that we've all clicked or said, yes, we signed on some line, people will come back and they'll be like, what does is mean here?
Okay, Clinton. But yeah, this is one of the problems of us using our human language, which has multiple meanings for each individual word, as well as the way that we construct sentences. There are certain languages that only mean one thing. The problem is they're usually computer languages, and so they're unambiguous. But that's not how humans work in an unambiguous way.
This is like totally off topic here, but there was this thing back in the early 20th century, and it kind of comes out of the 19th century, and this dream of having a logically perfect language, which is how Ludwig Wittgenstein expressed the concept. And it was called the Logicist Project. And, people like Bertrand Russell were particularly important in it. And Russell had this book, The Philosophy of Logical Atomism, that I think is probably one of the best expressions of this ideal. And his dream was essentially, and it was nothing other than a dream, to take language and then logically analyze it down to like the bare bones. And that would be the stuff that would be completely, as we say, univocal, where a term only has one meaning, and that meaning is fixed, doesn't change from context to context, and then you like rebuild everything back up to the level where like you and I are right now talking in normal human language, not uber nerd speak. And it was a complete failure.
Because at least I would assume that it took a teenager speaking this for about 5 minutes before they decided to throw some new slang in there.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. But that would be one. There'd be so many things that could defeat this, right? And teenagers and the coining of neologisms that we call slang, that would be a perfect example. You don't even have to like make new words. You can just take the words that you've already got and give them a slightly different meaning. Like think about how cringe has entered our vocabulary in the last, maybe 15 years or so. Mm-hmm. And now cringe is a mood, and mood doesn't mean mood necessarily. It means something different, and which is similar to vibe. But, if you ask people, well, what is all this stuff? They can't always give you definitions of it. Well, that would be very botherful for the Russell of that time. And also the Wittgenstein of the Tractatus era, where it was the same idea. We can get to a point where everything is clear. And there's sort of like, in comedy, you have the straight man who doesn't make jokes but is the butt of jokes. The Logicist Project was great for making philosophers the butt of philosophical jokes.
Yeah. It's...
Now, of course, we're...
Also...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that also kind of like kills art that uses words. Any poetry is going to be incredibly hampered by this constraint of being perfectly clear.
Even things that are less metaphorical, like creative nonfiction or just, plain old essays, would be done in by that, and they wouldn't be that enjoyable. We should get back to the topic of justice and stuff like that, but this is kind of a fascinating topic,
Right.
For the people...
Maybe a topic for another time.
Yeah, I'll just say this. For the people that are into that sort of thing, it's fascinating for them. It's enjoyable for them. But they seem like almost tone deaf. They don't realize that it flattens out everything else for everybody else. And it makes them rather unpopular.
All right. So, we've got a number of different thinkers that have different ideas of justice throughout the ages. We're going to touch upon a couple of them. So we start off with Plato.
Yeah, so Plato actually has a whole bunch of different ideas thrown into his dialogues at different points and put into the mouth of different people. So these are not all Plato endorsing that. He's not, schizophrenic in the sense of like holding a whole bunch of different ideas in his head that are mutually contradictory. But they are pretty cool to think through. And, the Republic is probably the most important dialogue because it's about justice. And Socrates has this set of discussions with these younger men where they put forth some ideas. And one of the very commonsensical idea, I think it kind of goes to this thing that you were talking about before, justice is giving people their due. This guy Polemarchus says justice is doing good to good people and doing bad to bad people. So, it kind of makes sense, right? Bad people deserve bad things. Good people deserve good things. He also frames it in terms specifically of doing good to friends and doing bad to enemies, but we could generalize it a bit more and just say good people in general and bad people in general. And it sounds good, but as Socrates shows us, it breaks down very quickly because there's a number of different problems. Probably the most damning one is, well, how do we actually know who the good and bad people are? We're often mixed up about that. We rely upon a friend who turns out to betray us, and are they a friend? No, they're not a friend anymore. They're a bad person, and what they deserve is something bad in return. But things aren't always quite so cut and dry as that. There's people who are kind of in between, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. What do we do with them? So I think that's a serious
and another
problem.
caveat is like, okay, if I consider myself and my friends to be good, but I have this enemy over there, they probably think that them and themselves and their friends are all good, and that I'm the enemy and I'm bad. And so, how does one determine one is good or bad, especially in a much more gray world?
Yeah, I mean that one doesn't necessarily constitute a throw it out kind of damning conclusion, in part because you can say, well, they're enemies over there. They're friends with their friends, but they view you as an enemy, therefore as bad. They're going to behave badly towards you. You think that you're good, but you also see them as bad. So you just get a cycle of doing bad stuff to each other, right? And that's actually kind of sustainable. If you think about cultures or organizations that have these rivalries that go on for generations, that could actually work. It's not intellectually coherent or morally coherent, but it's workable, right?
Well, it's coherent within your own tribe.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to make that a baseline idea, then now you have the same criteria resulting in different outcomes.
Yeah. Somebody else coming in from the outside who belongs to neither of these two groups that view their in-group as friends and the out-group as enemies would look at that and be like, you're all screwed, Right. I mean, that's sort of like the plot of so many Star Trek episodes, isn't it?
Yeah.
They show up. There's two groups of people that are fighting over something. It turns out to be complete BS what they're fighting over, stemming from something that happened like 30 generations ago.
Mm-hmm. We are unfortunately tribalistic creatures.
Well, and I think that theory of justice, it responds to that fact that we are tribalistic creatures. Yeah, so maybe that is a place where a lot of people do start.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, it is sustainable, at least, very least in the short term, and it's definitely it creates a cohesiveness in a group if you have a orientation against an out group. But it's not really sustainable if you're thinking about the well-being of all people.
And it's interesting, too, when you think about it in terms of in groups and out groups, because a lot of the moral progress that we've made in the 21st century and the 20th century and the 19th century is widening the scope of who gets to count as being part of our society. And some people see that as a weakness, right? There's a lot of proposals. We need to purify things, go back to the America that we knew in the past, which is, an illusory, made up thing. But yeah, I mean, if you think about multicultural societies, this conception of justice is just not going to work for those very well. And that's what we live in, you know?
And we're living in a multicultural justice in which at least portions of the populace are still living in a very tribalistic center for their ideas of justice and who should be deserving of goods and accolades and who should be not.
Or even who should be treated as enemies within the very society, you know? So this is a good transition to talk about another theory that comes up. Again, not one that Plato's endorsing, but one that he thinks is really important to consider. And there's two characters in particular who articulate this. One is Callicles in the Gorgias, and the other is Thrasymachus, who's probably a little bit more famous and maybe familiar to people, the young sophist in the beginning of the Republic, who claims that justice is the interest or the advantage of the stronger. So this is what we often call a might makes right theory, where justice is just what the powerful claim it to be or decide it to be. And it's, Thrasymachus kind of exemplifies this. He's trying to get everybody to pay him for telling them what justice is. He yells at Socrates. He insults him. But after a while, he calms down. And it turns out this doesn't work very well. And there's, I think you could see some of the problems with it just on its face. There's that relativistic problem of, well, which powerful person? This one over here or this one over here? What do you do when they disagree with each other?
It's the problem of tyrants. It's like once you have a powerful leader that is in himself making bad decisions that are going to specifically harm the people that they are supposed to be ruling, then how is this just? Just because he can come in and murder you, it's like, oh well, I'm not going to murder you today.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It brings out that what we're talking about here maybe isn't justice; it's just force or fear, and it's a mistake to call that justice. And you can say, well, why do they want to call it justice? They're clearly getting something out of that, like it makes them feel better about themselves, or it's a way of controlling people. Like if I go after you and I take your stuff, I kick in your door and I take your stuff, and you try to intervene and I hit you with a stick or something like that. If I then add insult to injury by saying what I'm doing is perfectly just, you're going to be like, you're full of crap, man. But if I have the coercive power of the state, and we could call it the rhetorical power of custom or something like that, what people are used to on my side, a lot of people might be like, yeah, man, you should have known better than to clash with the powers that be. Clearly you got what's coming to you. I think this is a common dynamic.
If only you didn't resist.
Yeah. Yeah. And this isn't just about, like, say, police or stuff like that. We see this happening in academic institutions. We see this happening in sexual politics when people say, oh, well, you shouldn't have dressed that way if you didn't want to get harassed or, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the main reasons why this really kind of grates on us is that it usually results in a reduction of our autonomy. There's no, if you're going to try to make a society or a government that is based on an idea of might makes right, then it's not going to be beneficial for like the flourishing of individual humans,
right?
Except for like the one guy who can do it, and because we're also a social species, we can get a whole bunch of, if it's one guy going around being bad to people, then you get a whole bunch of group together and you go, okay, well, now I've got more people, I've got more might, and we've get rid of you, and it turns this into a potential recurring violence,
a cycle of violence. Yeah, and that goes back to that thing that you were pointing out about anger, people, when all you really have to keep people in line is force, and you lack a perception of legitimacy, that makes people angry when force is used on them. They're like, this is BS. This is arbitrary. This is unfair. And sooner or later, I mean, nowadays, coercive societies can be very coercive because they have lots and lots of tools,
The panopticon.
Yeah, technology that makes it possible to keep people in line. But we see this over and over again. Even in very repressive societies, people at some point are like, this is enough. I'm done with this. So, and it's often anger that's sparking that initial resistance.
Yeah. Look at like the Arab Spring, and what was that, like 2011, or was it later than that? 2016 maybe?
No, I want to say the early
10s.
Yeah. 2010s. Yeah, that's
the aughts. That at least no, it's not the aughts. It's the teens.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
Please.
Well, I was going to say another thing that, because we're spending a lot of time on the Republic here, that Plato has some of the smarter guys talk about is justice as, I mean, you mentioned, I don't remember the exact word that you used. Was it social convention or?
Social construct.
Social construct, yeah. So that idea was already around back in Plato's time, and Glaucon and Adeimantus, who, by the way, are Plato's brothers. He writes his own brothers into this story. They say, well, we don't actually believe what Thrasymachus says, but Socrates, you didn't knock his argument down. We're going to present you with a better argument. We want to see how you do with this. And they say that justice is essentially, it's kind of a fraud. It's a middle point between doing injustice and suffering injustice. So we all agree we don't want to we all want to do the wrong thing. We all want to be unfair to advantage ourselves. But because we don't want other people doing that to us, we say, let's all be nice. And so we'll all be just, and none of us really wants to be just, but we follow the rules so that we don't get ourselves into trouble with our neighbors. And, some of the stuff that Glaucon and Adeimantus point out in their time, I think is very true in our time. They're like, what is it that parents, and now not all parents, but what is it that parents say when they want their kids to be just? They point at the fact that you don't want to be ostracized. You want to get along in society. You want to be successful. And you can't do that without getting along with other people, and that means following these basic rules that otherwise you would feel free to violate, right? So they say nobody actually praises justice for its own sake. Everybody praises justice as something that will get you what it is that you want. And and they're saying this because they don't believe it themselves, but they want to see what sort of arguments can be brought out against this. And Socrates doesn't provide them with well, here's why it's wrong. He then goes into this big, long discussion of what an ideal city is like and how it's like the soul and all of this stuff. So the challenge isn't completely met right off the bat.
Right. And so now if we kind of go into his discussion of the kind of the tripartite soul that he associates with different portions of the city, with the your ruling faculty as your leaders, your merchants as the appetite, and the spirit as your military. That's your portion of it as part of your has your irascibility, your anger, or your source of anger, and that to describe it as a charioteer with your spirit and appetite as to horses, and you sitting upon the chariot as reason to control these two emotional appetites.
You're right. Two different metaphors, one coming from the Republic, one coming from the Phaedrus. The charioteers from the Phaedrus, but they both have the same elements to them three parts, one of which is reason, one of which is this, irascible part, the part that gives us energy, the part that's concerned with honor, and then all these base desires, for wealth and pleasure and stuff like that. Yeah.
And that if you want these things, as, he's kind of talking about from Glaucon and his other brother, that these are kind of, he's not refuting that in this regard. He's saying like, okay, here's what you want. Like you're trying to, use reason to control your spirit and appetite, because it wants things. And how do you actually get those in a proper way when you're living as a social creature in society? You can't go around just like beating up people to get what you want. It's going to backfire on you.
Yeah. One of the things I actually like about Plato's account is that, an experience that many of us have is that we can use reason instrumentally. Like we have a desire for something, right? And we're like, how do I get this thing that I want? And so we use reason in what we could call a Humean way. David Hume very famously said, reason is and can only be the slave of the passions, right? And so reason doesn't motivate us sufficiently to do the right thing, even though it tells us what the right thing to do would be, what the just thing to do or the fair thing to do would be. And even in Plato, who's, a real rationalist in the sense of thinking that reason does get us in touch with the good, the just, the beautiful, reason needs that spirited part of the soul as a helper to impose its rule on the appetites, just like the soldiers help keep order in the society, that the philosopher kings are telling, everybody else what to do. And so I think that's kind of a cool idea. I mean, it's something that many of us are quite familiar with. Just being told what the right thing to do is and being like, yeah, I get that intellectually. That's not always enough for us, And
here's something that, one of the first things when we're actually talking about like anger versus injustice, and that we have this idea of the tripartite soul, of which the thumos, the spirited portion of it, is that thing that is that anger. And so he is making this argument that that it is necessary for a proper organization of the human as well as the city in order to be in touch with this anger, and in part because you're using that as a response to what you might see as injustice. So you're using reason to define that and applying that anger in a proper way.
That's it. It can't just be like anger for the sake of anger or being a tough guy or something like that. Because one of the things that could go wrong is that spirited part of the soul could like get orders from reason and say, screw you. I've got the power now. I'm doing what I want to do, So... yeah. I mean, that's essentially how Plato depicts some of the very warlike societies in ancient Greece, like the Spartans. Although he does also say that the Spartans have become corrupt because they're seeking out wealth and stuff like that as well in Book 8 of the Republic. There is one other thing from Plato, though, that I think is really helpful to keep in mind. Those who are listening, when you hear Plato, one of the things that I think probably comes up first is this notion of Platonic form, right? That you've got like the perfect original, and then everything else is copies of that. And Plato really does think that with respect to justice. So there is like a perfect form of justice. Now, where does it live? There's a whole story about that we don't have to go into. Plato has like a world of this, but he doesn't adequately explain how the hell that works. But the thing that I think that is right about this, he says, every instance of justice that we see in the world, or we experience, or we enact, is only partly just. It's not perfectly just. There is no such thing as perfect justice here in this realm for us. You can look at something that is in fact a just action and you change the perspective slightly and it looks unjust because it's not wholly just. There is some injustice in justice in the way that we experience it. And, I think keeping this in mind would help so many people out, because there's this tendency to think that like we somehow are different than everybody else throughout history. And when we do our just, fair, right action, there's nothing bad about it whatsoever. And it's perfect. And everybody should recognize that. And then we get all pissed off when people are like, hey, you left out this thing over here, right?
It's the, was it Maya Angelou has the quote of like, do your best until you know better and then do better. Or if you just want to look through the long history of us as a human species making decisions, which we thought were, you go back 100 years and you think that a certain set of norms are totally great. And now we will look at these things as like really anathema. You go back a couple 100 years and like, slavery is super widespread and all these things that we've tried to tamp down in our modern era, but we look at them and it's like, oh yeah, they like this is right and proper that these people aren't actually fully people, and it's totally cool to do that. And like we'd be like, what are you thinking about? How are you even thinking this?
That is actually a great point. So in addition to the like error of thinking that what we like to call justice is totally just, I guess there's sort of a corresponding error of looking at what somebody else has done, some sort of social arrangement, and thinking that the injustice there makes it totally unjust, right? And so if we can't encounter complete justice within this world, we're not going to encounter complete injustice. It's diametric opposite anymore. There's going to be some modicum of justice within it, right? Little pockets,
I'm like putting on my like, is there this corner case of like perfect injustice? What would that even be? I don't know.
It's hard to conceptualize, that's for sure. Yeah.
Right. As it like maybe you could have like a perfect injustice for one individual person. I don't know. I'm thinking of like kind of like the idea of I think it's Ursula Le Guin's book, Those Who Walked Away from Omelas.
Oh, right, yeah.
They've got this perfect society, story. A perfect society, but for some reason the society required that they basically torture a child in a basement all the time.
A child who is unable to understand the reason behind it too. I think that's a key part of the story. So it's not like you or I could be like, yes, I will take on the heroic sacrifice of being tortured for the greater good. Like Mr. Spock would always have that. The good, how does the line go? The good of the many outweighs the good of the one.
Yeah, they're the few.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And so this child is unable to agree to that, to consent to that. They're just down there in this dreary little cell, afraid of a mop and a bucket and having a horrible, horrible time. And it sounds almost like there always has to be a child. So It's not just this child. If this child dies,
they need a new one.
Exactly. Yeah.
And actually, you bring up Star Trek, but the newest season of Brave New Worlds basically did exactly that.
Oh, really?
They have a whole episode. It's basically those who walked away from Omelas. So
I'm curious. Who said no to it? What was it? Just a few
captain.
People, or?
Well, there's like a group of people, and then also the captain eventually finds out, and Captain Pike.
Okay.
And so it's like this closed off society. They don't let people know like how exactly it runs, but it requires I guess spoiler alerts. I guess you don't even know the name of the episode. It requires a child's brain as a core component of this giant machinery that runs their planet, their society, and if if they don't have the child's brain, then the machinery falls apart and the whole like planet implodes.
That's pretty drastic.
Yeah. So
this is again totally off topic.
Totally off. So
you would think that somebody in that society would be like, this can only be a stopgap solution. We need to figure out something else to keep our planet from exploding, so we don't have to keep on sacrificing child brains. This is not like a workable, sustainable solution to things. But I guess maybe they didn't. Maybe they're like, well, good enough.
Maybe they're like too happy enjoying their incredibly amazing lives that they're like, There are some people from the society who also walk away and they go live in some really destitute planet. So I don't know. It was a little bit on the nose and like how black and white, but that's kind of the whole point of that story.
Yeah.
But going back to Plato here, like we have this idea of justice, but any representation of justice is going to be a simulacrum, a poor copy of this kind of ideal of justice.
Yeah.
But I think we should maybe move on to Aristotle.
Yeah, and I'm not a Platonist myself, so I don't buy that there are perfect forms of justice or goodness or beauty or these things that he's saying, or let alone bed, to use another example, like the ideal bed out there. I find it a little bit more plausible that there could be ideal justice. I don't think that there's going to be a bed that all other beds are mere copies of, that seems a non-starter to me. But yeah, so we can go to Aristotle, and Aristotle, he picks up with some of these themes in the one book of the Nicomachean Ethics that is entirely devoted to justice, which shows you that Aristotle thought this was a really important topic. He begins by saying people get into all sorts of arguments with each other because they don't realize that justice is what we call an equivocal term, meaning a term with multiple senses. And they don't realize this in part because the senses are kind of close to each other. So already we've talked about a number of different theories or interpretations or perspectives on justice here. Aristotle thinks that this is what happens to people all of the time, and they're kind of talking past each other in a lot of cases. But because they think they're talking about the same thing, they get ticked off with each other. They're like, how can you be so stupid as to think that this thing is justice? I think this is something we experience quite often.
Right. Yes, we see it, in our politics, especially if we're talking about Aristotle, anything that deals with like two or more people is politics, right? But
True,
like even at our state and national politics, like what is the correct distribution of funds to different people? Do we want to give more to education? Do we want to give more to military spending, or or whatever?
Student loans, yeah.
Yeah,
big topic.
Right, and so how do we actually, if we don't have the same sense of what these things are, we think that one other person's idea of justice and just like the allocation of goods and services in our society is going to be unjust for others.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes it takes experiencing the effects of it or having familiarity with something to realize the unfairness of it. So like, for example, let's take, laws and police and prisons. There's this sense that a lot of people have that, we should make prison as harsh and as unpleasant and retributive as possible because those bastards did crimes and they need to be punished and suffer for what they did. And in some cases that kind of makes sense. There were some people when I was teaching at Indiana State Prison, which is a maximum security prison. So everybody who was in there for pretty serious crimes, with the exception of the drug offenses, right? Because we punish those unfairly, unjustly in a lot of ways. And there were some prisoners who other prisoners would like point out and say, you see that guy over there? I hope that guy never gets out because he is thoroughly evil. And I know I'm a bad person, but that guy scares the crap out of me. And you need to keep him as far away from other human beings as possible. So there is some recognition that maybe with some people, things could be merited. But a lot of the things that the, people on the outside view as, oh, this is the just desserts, it's not really just when you are involved with it or experience it. Seeing people get inadequate medical care, for example, in prisons, that's not fair. That's actually kind of sadistic to wish that on somebody. The old thing of, oh, you're going to get thrown in prison and then you're going to get raped, which often doesn't happen.
But the idea that we think, oh, that's right and proper is also, in the whole idea of this retributive justice, it's just kind of like an eye for an eye. I want you did something that hurt someone, and thus I want to hurt you back. And even for this gentleman that you're talking about, that the other prisoners thought that they don't want him ever out, doesn't mean that you have to make their experience while they are incarcerated to be hellish. You just have to make sure that they're not interacting. It's like protective for the rest of the society to make sure that he's sequestered, but you also don't need to go out of your way to make them hurt.
It is actually pretty difficult, and it takes a greater toll on the other prisoners to make the really bad prisoner's life hellish. It's kind of ineffective. And, there's all sorts of other things that we could talk about, in terms of like the fairness to the society. And I'm not a, soft on crime kind of guy myself, but you look at the ways in which we punish and the conditions that we make people live under, and the authority and power that we give to prison administrators and guards who sometimes are quite unjust themselves. And you can see that real justice is not taking place within the criminal justice system a lot of the time, But to people on the outside, until they actually get caught up within it, they might not see that,
I reoriented my way of thinking about this into
interesting.
more of I look at as like us. We as individual humans, we're humans, and we have this full lives as humans, but if we're looking at the criminal justice system, it is a system in which we as individuals fit a place in society. And just as your carburetor has a place in a car, if the carburetor gets all gunked up, you don't get angry at the carburetor. You fix it.
And hit it with the wrench. Yeah.
And you put it back together. You might have to clean it out or whatnot, and you put it back together. Or at some point in time, it can't be fixed, and so you have to get a new one. I'm not advocating for the death penalty here, but I am advocating for sequestering of those people that are not able to be returned to society, but also to not actually have to actively go out. And so as long as you don't see them as, I need them to feel bad, you can look at them as things that could be improved to be replaced. And this comes back to our conversation we had not too long ago, talking about why people do things. Do they do things because they're bad or evil, or because they think that's the best thing at the time? They thought, for the most part, that was the best thing to do at the time.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make any sense for us to punish them when teaching them better would do just as better, if not.
Seneca
just as good, or if not better.
Seneca talks about that in his book on anger, which is very concerned with not just anger, but justice. And he says that, I forget exactly how he puts it, but we should be oriented much more at what you've been talking about is like a rehabilitative approach to things. And if somebody is indeed so far gone that they can't but be an enemy to all the rest of humankind, then we unfortunately have to incapacitate them. Back then that meant killing them. Now we can, lock people up for years and years and years, right? So, and he said all of that can be done without this desire for revenge, and I think he's right about that. But coming back to the Aristotle, one of the things that he says that I really wanted to talk about and maybe kick around as an idea. So when we get justice wrong, it's often because we rightly emphasize one aspect of it. So one prime example that he gives in the politics is oligarchs, people who are for, a elite rule in society. They realize that people who are wealthy are making a greater contribution to the overall society in terms of their wealth, right? They if they do indeed pay more taxes, right? In our society, a lot of rich people are getting away without paying taxes, but let's just assume that that's the case. And he says, the oligarchs who think that they should get to run things, they're partly right, but partly wrong. They're realizing that, they are contributing something to the society that other people aren't, but that doesn't give them the right to dominate everything. Other people, and he talks about like the many in this case, think that, well, we're all free, so we should all be totally equal. And that's right in some contexts, right? Like we should all get to watch the Packers play and none of us should have a crappy seat behind the pillar so we can't see the game, or, we should all have equal opportunity to go do certain things. But it's not completely right. You don't want to say, the person who's going to operate on me, any old guy walking in off the street should have the opportunity to cut up my organs and stuff, right? So, and what Aristotle says is each of them, they're partly right, they're partly wrong. They grasp one aspect and then they turn that into an absolute. And I think that this is the case for so many things in our society. It's not just rich and poor or rich and many. It can be in terms of gender, it can be in terms of race, it can be in terms of who's suffered historically and who hasn't. It can be all sorts of differentials where there's some people who are like, think about this whole notion of like rich people being job creators so they should get to do whatever the hell they want and not pay any taxes. It's not completely unjust. It's not completely off base, but it sure as hell isn't, the epitome of justice that a lot of people have made it into,
Yeah. And it in that case, it also like totally alienates the worker from from their even the concept of them being laborers. And that it removes the agency from the laborers. It's like, oh, no, you happen to be there by the good grace of this job creator.
Yeah.
That you have a job, not that you have a skill that is necessary for them to actually, produce these goods that they want, or services that they want to actually sell.
That reminds me of something that Blaise Pascal says in his Pensées when he's defining what tyranny is. We usually think of tyranny as like one-man rule, politically. And Pascal says you're tyrannical anytime that you take some legitimate good by which you sort of stand out and you're trying to turn that into an absolute, so because you're attractive, you should be given political power, or you should enjoy this privilege, or because you're a good speaker, you should have the benefits of an attractive person, like having people desire you, or because, and we could go on and on and on. There's all these ways in which we have, good things about ourselves, and then people turn them into reasons why they should get more than everybody else. When sometimes the fact that we have a good thing means we don't need as much, right? If I'm smart enough to figure out complicated problems, maybe I don't need people helping me out as much as some poor guy who can't figure out how to get on the bus, you know?
So, and this kind of brought me to, like, you were talking about, like, there's these two things. Either, you have giving people, like, what they're and kind of like meritocracy type thing, or also making sure that everyone has kind of like an equal given to them, or at least what
I know
they
where
need.
You're going. Yeah.
And we have Rawls here, John Rawls, who has another theory of justice as fairness, and this is both of these concepts are now smashed together into kind of his idea of what it is to create a society that has fairness. And his concept incorporates both a need that everyone has, like a basic need met to them, and they have equal access to many opportunities, especially equal access to running for positions in government for representation. Doesn't mean that they are automatically given these things, but they have the ability to run for these things, as well as they that people are rewarded for their work in a very meritocratic sort of ideal, and this is brought to through at least the thought experiment of the veil of ignorance.
Yeah. I mean, before we go into the veil of ignorance, I will say that one thing I really, really like about Rawls' approach in what he calls the difference principle, so like this is why we can still pay doctors more than the janitor, is he says that if we're going to have inequalities, then the overall system has to work out for the benefit of the worst off. Now, that's something that we often don't have in the way that we distribute benefits and harms to people, the kind of inequalities that we put up with. So that means that, think about a hospital. Who would be the most vulnerable? Well, obviously the patients, right? But also the people who don't make much money and are stuck, say doing janitorial work, where they might be having to clean up hazmat stuff. If the doctor is going to be paid more, that's fine. We should pay them more, but it has to work out for the benefit of all of the most disadvantaged. I think that's pretty fair.
And he brings this out in the concept of maximin, and in many ways you try to maximize a certain thing, in most of our economies you're trying to maximize the most profit. That's great, but it might also have some negative externalities. In his idea of maximin, the society, at least as a society, that you're trying to maximize for the minimum, and so whatever society produces the most for the least of the people in the society is the society that you should go for. So he would definitely not create Omelos because that person is doing the worst.
Right.
So basically, you might cut off some of the peaks of incredible wealth excess, but you make sure that everyone is at least covered to a minimum.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that has been eroded significantly in our lifetime, in our society, and in others. I mean, this is something that I think is a lot of people in Great Britain are very worried about, But we should. You mentioned the veil of ignorance, so we should tell our viewers, if they didn't listen to the episode way back on thought experiments where we talked about this, we should tell them what it is now.
So the veil of ignorance is a thought experiment by which you, before you are born into a society, it is a thought experiment after all, create a society in which you do not know where you will be born into it. And so the thought experiment goes, if you are to create a society, you would want to create a society in which if you happen to draw the short straw and get the worst position in society, you would still have a happy and productive life.
Yeah. So a lot of the inequalities that we accept as just being part of the way things are, those would go by the wayside, because if you're rational, I mean, think about like gender inequality, right? So if we, as has been often the case historically, if men are privileged over women, not necessarily every single man and every single woman, but on the aggregate, but you don't know whether you're going to be a man or a woman. You'd be stupid to set up a society in which you might get screwed over,
Yeah, so once again, you don't know if you're male or female, rich or poor, smart or dumb. Any particular axis that you want to throw into, you could be any of these things.
The smart or dumb thing brings up a really interesting point. Rawls also says that you can't predict what sort of interests or psychological proclivities you might have. So, let's say there's a hobby that you really can't stand in the current world. And you would, be like, yeah, let's get rid of all those people who do that thing,
Model train builders.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good one, right? Oh, those insufferable model trainers or whatever they call themselves. I'm sure there's some name for it.
Microengineers?
Maybe. You don't know that under the veil of ignorance, you might actually have whatever we're going to call it, an inclination to collecting and running and chatting about model trains. So you sure as hell wouldn't want to make things difficult for model train enthusiasts.
Yeah, so he's definitely trying to maximize the freedom for whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, you could say this about people's sexual desires, so long as they're, there'd have to be certain guardrails. You can't be I'm super into hurting everybody all the time. Okay, that wouldn't be one that you would want in the society. But a lot of things that people consider kinks, I think Rawls would probably, although I think was pretty straight-laced.
Oh, yeah. Especially going by his writing.
Yeah, would probably
very dry.
You don't want to rule that sort of thing out. Or, think about pineapple on pizza. We'll take something more innocuous that people get really, really upset about. You wouldn't, if you were a good Rawlsian, you wouldn't want a world where pineapple on pizza was ruled out. Because maybe you like it.
And so one of the big things about this is, as fairness, we have a lot of people that feel like the society that we built is unfair, and they become angry about this. Kind of coming back to our anger idea.
Yeah.
Is that we are working towards trying to find a better way to deal with this anger, and if there's a feeling of injustice, that is one of definitely the major ways that this come to.
That's a really interesting point. I don't recall Rawls, and it's been a while since I've read A Theory of Justice, talking about anger or indignation, right? But maybe that would be something that could be brought into his treatment. If you were to see an injustice and get angry about it, maybe that's something that under the veil of ignorance we would rule out.
Right. So, it's coming to the end of the hour here, so I think we should sign off. So I've got the words of Seneca the Younger. The sword of justice is ill-placed in the hands of an angry man.